All right, so you found a young player and you're thinking about signing them. The question is, how do you know whether they have the potential to actually be a good player for you? So today we're going to look at the steps that I use and I think that are kind of pretty commonly used to decide whether a young player is actually going to be good enough for your squad. And the caveat here is you're not going to be right about young players 100% of the time. Football Manager is purposely vague with a lot of things, so you're not always going to hit. But we can use this method to make sure that we're hitting 75% of the time, 80% of the time, to make sure that we're getting things right pretty often so that we can be relatively confident when we're signing a young player to know that they are going to be a good player for our team if we develop them correctly. So let's look at some young players and let's see how this works in action. So I'm going to start off by illustrating this with a young player in my Southampton squad who I know is going to be good. And then we're going to implement this into an actual player who I might think about signing. So let's start off with our new gen here, Lenny Tip, who came up through the youth intake. So I know that this is a player with a lot of potential. So I'm going to talk about how I know this and how I would implement this with a player who I was thinking about signing. And then we'll do this with an actual player that I might think about signing. So step number one is to establish a scout report on a player. So when you find a young player, even if they have pretty good current ability, you need to establish that there is a high potential in this player, that this player has room to grow. And if we look at a player's attributes, you don't know that just by looking at a player's attributes. You can't sit here and say, just because he has a high current ability at 16, 17, 18 years old, you don't know what this player's ceiling. You can establish a high floor, but this doesn't mean that you know what that potential looks like. And the only way you can really figure this out in game is to assign a scout to that player and get a scout report. So again, we're looking at a player here. We are looking at his coach report, equivalent to a scout report here. And I see 4 to 5 star potential ability in Lenny Tip. So what this has established for me is we have a player with high potential ability. The potential is there. So we found a young player. We found a young player with high potential ability. The question after this is, can he get there? And the last thing I'm going to add to the potential ability part is if you are looking at a player, assign a scout who you trust. Make sure that you can trust the star potentials that you look at. Naturally, at younger age, as they're, 15, 16, 17 years old, there's going to be a little bit more variation in the stars, but make sure you're getting something closer to you can trust. Get a scout with good judging player potential attribute. Assign them if you have a player you're really interested in, assign that scout specifically to that player, get a good reading on them, and make sure that you can trust those star potentials. But star potentials obviously aren't the end all be all, so this is where we need our eyes. So step number one was to scout the player and make sure that that potential ability exists. Once you have established a high potential ability, the next thing to do is actually look at the attributes of the player and determine how close or far away he is from that potential ability. So we're going to look at Lenny Tip here, and does he actually have the makings? Even with that high potential, we need to make sure that he has the makings of a good player for the position he's playing. So how do we do that? Well, Football Manager here highlights for you the attributes that are actually important for the position that he's playing him here. So let's take that away real quick. So this is what, the base level of a player looks like. And just from this, if I know that I want to play him at right back, I already have, attributes in my head that I want for a wing back. I want him to have good crossing and dribbling. I want decent marking. I want decent tackling. Positioning it off the ball and work rate are important for me. I want other good defensive attributes, maybe things like anticipation and bravery, and I want decent physical attributes. So I know what I want, but let's say you weren't totally sure what you wanted. If you're not sure what attributes are important for a player, just click on the position. And its Football Manager tells you, highlights for you what what attributes are important for that position. Green attributes are most important, and attributes highlighted in blue are kind of like second most important. So here, Football Manager is telling you, hey, these are the attributes important for this position. So for us, and when we're evaluating the potential of this player, okay, we're going to look at these attributes specifically. So I'm looking at Lenny Tip here, and I see a player who's already pretty good at the attributes I wanted to be at, especially for 16 years old. Crossings, already 12. Dribbling, already 9. Decent first touch at this age. Passing, phenomenal. Marking, already pretty good. Tackling and technique, already pretty good. We're seeing really great work rate, really great decision making, and decent physicals for just 16 years old. So I'm already seeing a player here at 16 years old with a high current ability. But I also know he has pretty good potential ability. So if I see a player with good potential ability, I need to imagine what is he going to look like when he reaches his potential. So if I want to do this, you have a player here who has about 3 stars to get to. He's still going to advance by 3 stars. If I'm looking at a 3-star player, with 3 stars of potential still to go, I can feel comfortable saying a lot of these attributes are going to improve by about 3 to 4. So what I'm going to do here, and this is kind of on the lower end. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to increase our important attributes by 3 to 4 attribute points. So if I'm looking at a player now with crossing, maybe 14 or 15, dribbling, maybe around 12 to 13, first touch, 11 to 12, marking, 15 or 16, passing, around 18, tackling, around 15 or 16, technique, around 14, work rate, maybe up to, 17 or 18. Off the ball and positioning are going to improve to be around 11. And physicals can improve even more than that. So I'm looking at a player physically, pace could be 14 or 15, stamina could be around 15, strength will be 11 or 12, agility, balance, and acceleration are all going to be high. So when I'm thinking about those things and I'm imagining a player who looks like that, I'm imagining a player here who will look really good. I'm imagining a player here with great attributes to be a wingback on, I would actually say, support or attack, because I see a player whose future has good crossing and dribbling, has good passing and marking, has good tackling and decent physicals. So, again, what are we doing here? At 16 years old, we're looking at the attributes and saying, do we have the bones? Do we have the foundations laid to have a good player here? And I see good foundations. I see good marking, I see good tackling, I see good work rate, and I see decent physicals. And then I take those foundations, I look at the potential ability and say, all right, he could improve potentially by 2 to 3 stars. So a 2 to 3 star improvement, I'm equating to 3 to 4 ticks higher in attribute. So I'm adding those 3 to 4 ticks higher in attribute. And if I like that player and I think that player is first team quality, then 100% I am looking at a player who I'm definitely going to consider signing. And I also want to note here, you have a caveat, right? Of you look at a player, but you increase those attributes by, 3 or 4 ticks, and you're not sure, like, all right, is this a good player? If you're not sure, just go to your squad, go to your first team squad, click on a player in that position. My starting right back is Kyle Walker-Peters, and compare them. Is Lenny Tip's future comparable to my Kyle Walker-Peters right now? And if I think he is, then yes, this is a player I absolutely would want to sign. And that being said, Lenny Tip is 16 years old, so I think I'm actually being conservative with those 3 to 4 higher attribute points. If he was like 20 years old and maybe he only had another star, another 2 stars to get to, I maybe wouldn't go 3 to 4 attribute points. I might do like 1 to 2 or 1 to 3. For the important ones, they'll develop a little bit more. So things like tackling, passing, work rate, teamwork, those will develop a little bit more. But for these other ones, they might not improve much or maybe just 1 attribute point. So just keep that in mind as you're framing what your future player might look like. So again, to reiterate, step number 1, scout your player, make sure that potential exists. Step number 2, use your eyes. Do I have a player who can, based on their current ability, actually reach that potential? And do I actually like what their attributes will look like once they reach that potential? And finally, step number 3 is deciding, all right, we've established potential. We've established that if this player reaches our potential, we like what he looks like. The last thing to consider is, will this player reach their potential? If we put him in the first team squad and we train him properly, will he actually get to this potential? And this is where Lenny Tip is really strong. The first step to actually reaching that potential is, how far away is he from that potential? At 16 years old, Lenny Tip is pretty far. But if he was 21 years old and he was 1.5 to 4 stars, he's not going to reach that potential. He doesn't have enough time to get there. So we're in a strong position here with Lenny Tip because he has a long way to go, but he has a lot of time to get there. So in that time, can we get him there? Well, there's one thing that really stands out: a professional personality. Professionalism is the most important way, or is the most important hidden attribute to actually getting to your potential ability. So if I'm looking at a youngster here and I see professional, if I see fairly professional, obviously things like model citizen, but if I see things like perfectionist or driven or any of those personalities, I'm looking at a player and saying they are definitely going to get there. I have established high potential. I have established a good personality. So they're going to be a good trainer. We're going to see all of these upward arrows that we're seeing in Lenny Tip. I know they're going to be fantastic. Now, I think the biggest thing with the personality, especially for a player who's like 16 years old, like their professionalism will improve over time. Just make sure that you don't have anything that is going to be a red flag for development. You don't want low professionalism or anything like that. So make sure you're not seeing any red flags with their personality. If you have a player like this, you feel like they're going to be pretty good, just make sure they don't have obviously low professionalism, and you should be good to sign them. So once you've gone through all of those steps, you've established that there is potential ability. You've established that you like what their attributes are going to look like once they reach their potential ability. And you've established a good enough personality that their development will be aided or at least not hindered by it. Once you've established all those things, you can feel pretty confident in signing your player. So I'm looking at my scouting center here, and my scouts have found a bunch of players with high potential. So I'm just going to sort by potential here. My scouts have found a bunch of players with high potential with very good recommendations. So let's go through and do this. Let's go through and do this with Isaac Babadi. He's Dutch. He plays for Leeds. He is actually on loan from PSV. So he's at PSV, and he costs a lot of money. So I can't afford him right now, but let's say I could afford him. Would I want to sign him? So we started off step number 1, scout report. We've established the potential exists. So step number 2, let's look at his attributes. And I would play him probably, if I'm looking at his attributes here, I'd probably look at playing him as a winger. So I'm going to add him as a winger. We have 4-star current ability and 4 to 5-star potential ability. So I like where his current ability is at. At just 19 years old, I think he can reach his potential. Now, let's look at those attributes. And I do like his attribute distribution. So I've got everything highlighted here. Most importantly, he has good physicals and physicals that will improve. He has good off the ball, decent work rate, and decent technicals. So if I'm looking at this player and saying, okay, I think that if we look at the scout report, he's going to improve probably by a star or so. And at just 19 years old, I think he could improve by, let's add two attribute ticks to each one. So two attribute ticks, we look at 16 dribbling, 15 crossing, 16 first touch, 15 passing, good technique, good off the ball, good work rate, and a physical phenom if those things can improve by, two attribute ticks. So I'm looking at a player here who I think could be really good in the future. He has a media description of Wonderkid, and his personality is fairly determined. Now, fairly determined doesn't tell us a whole lot about his professionalism. It tells us his professionalism is sky high, but it doesn't tell us that his professionalism is low. So we can probably say he's probably got middle of the road professionalism, in the 11s and 12s. But they've already developed a lot. They're already 4 stars. They have, arguably 5-star potential. So if I could afford this player, if he was a little bit less money, this is absolutely a player that I would look at signing. That being said, Isaac Babadi, he's pretty good. He's already 4 stars. Let's look at maybe some tougher examples. Let's look at a player like Alexander here, who's playing for Fluminense in Brazil, and he's already 20 years old. And that 20 years old is important because he's already 2.5-star potential. He does have 5-star potential, potentially, 4 to 5-star potential. He's interested in joining the club, and he's actually not too expensive. But the question is, at 20 years old, he still has 4 years of development left, but he's a little bit older, and he's not quite as good. So do I think he's going to get there? This is crucial because I need to look at a 20-year-old. Am I going to play him or do I need to send him out on loan if I believe he can reach that potential? So he's a lot of potential again. So again, we're improving those attributes by 2 or 3 attribute ticks. So if I were playing him here, I'm looking at his attributes and I would actually probably play him as maybe a ball winning midfielder on defend. So let's look at those attributes. Tackling's okay. Marking's pretty good. He's got decent mentals, although not super high aggression or bravery. And he's got okay physical attributes. So if we improved all of these things by, maybe 2 attribute points, good marking, decent tackling, decent physicals, decent mentals and decent physicals. Fairly determined. So again, he doesn't have sky high professionalism. But to be honest, if I'm looking at this player, I see a player in the future who's pretty mid. I don't think he's fantastic. I don't think he's going to be a world beater, but I don't think he's going to be terrible. So that's kind of my opinion on him. So now I'm judging it based on my transfer budget. Would I sign him? For 9 to 11 million, I do think he'll improve to be worth much more than that. So I probably would still look at signing him. Um, but I don't think he's going to be a world beater. So this is kind of my opinion on Alexander. He's not a must buy, but he is maybe a buy to develop and sell later on type of player, in my opinion. So that's Alexander. Now let's look at another player here. We have Harry Leonard, who, again, if we look at the scout report, he's got, 4 to 5-star potential ability, but right now he's a 2.5-star player. He's a good Sky Bet championship player. So now I'm looking at Harry Leonard, and again, I'm looking at an advanced forward here. Does he have a holy trinity? How's that technique? How's that composure? How's that off the ball? How are those physicals? Now, he's got some things going for him here. If I look at his scout report, again, that potential ability exists somewhere in there. And at 20 years old, he's already fairly professional. So this means he will continue to develop. So now I'm going to improve those attribute points again. And I like Harry Leonard. But again, this is another player who I don't think is a world beater. I don't think I don't know if he could play at a top club. If I want to be a team who's going to make it to a top club, if I'm improving these by like 2, to be honest, I don't think Harry Leonard's going to get there. But for a mid-table English Premier League club, that's where I think that level for Harry Leonard is going to be at, looking at his attribute distribution and imagining what I think he's going to look like in the future. And that is pretty much how this works. And you can just keep going down this list. Now, some other things to think out for, Alexander is Brazilian. When I'm looking at his scout report, I'm looking at potential ability, but I'm also looking at other things like adaptability. Could he adapt well to living in another country? That suggests that he could reach his potential. So that's something we want to look at. So if you have players who are from another country who you're trying to bring in, pay attention to things like adaptability in the scout report. The scout report is going to be really important for you to make sure that development exists and to make sure that player is adaptable enough to be able to hit that potential. But again, you could do this for just days. You could go through and do this for all of these players here, and you can just keep going down. Anyone who you find, any young player who you find, these steps will pretty reliably allow you to decide whether or not you want to sign them. Scout them first. Make sure the potential exists. If they're from another country, make sure they have the adaptability. After you've established that that potential is there, click on the player, look at their attributes. Do they have, at a young age, the makings of a good player? Do they have a foundation of attributes that look like they're going to be good? Then look at, imagine what they would look like in the future. If they have a lot of potential to go, add 2 or 3 attribute points and look and see what they're going to look like. Because even if that potential ability is there, if you add those 2 or 3 attribute points and you don't think they're going to be very good, then trust your eyes. They're probably not going to be very good. Always trust your eyes in Football Manager. Always trust what you see. And then if you've done all those things and you like that player, make sure there's nothing in their personality that is going to seriously hinder them from becoming the player that they could be. Because if you're looking at a personality and it says their professionalism is going to be bad, then you don't want to sign that player because no matter how high that potential ability is, they're not going to get close to it. So those are the 3 steps. And if you follow those steps, you will generally be able to find good young players who will get into your first team and you will hit much more often than you miss. All right, so in conclusion, those are the 3 steps that I use to identify and determine whether young players actually can be good enough for my squad. We scout them to make sure that that potential ability exists and for any other hidden things like adaptability that we need to know about. Number 2, we look to make sure that those foundation of attributes are there and that if we add 2 or 3 attribute points to them, that we have a player who we're really going to like. And then finally, we look at their personality and make sure that their personality is good for a player who can actually develop and that they don't have any major red flags. If you do all those things and you find a player who you really, really like, sign them and they will probably work out for you. But with that, I hope you found this video to be informative. I hope this helps you to scout young players, identify young players who are going to be good for you, and that you're able to build a team of Wonderkids to take over the footballing world. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you found it helpful. I hope everyone's having a great week, and I will see you all next time. Bye.